This episode is brought to you by Shopify. Do you have a point of sale system you can trust, or is it a real POS? You need Shopify for retail. From accepting payments to managing inventory, Shopify POS has everything you need to sell in person. Go to shopify.com/system, all lowercase, to take your retail business to the next level today. That's shopify.com/system.
This podcast is supported by Progressive, a leader in RV insurance. RVs are for sharing adventures with family, friends, and even your pets. So if you bring your cats and dogs along for the ride, you'll want Progressive RV insurance. They protect your cats and dogs like family by offering up to $1,000 in optional coverage for vet bills in case of an RV accident, making it a great companion for the responsible pet owner who loves to travel. See Progressive's other benefits and more when you quote RV insurance at Progressive.com today. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Pet injury is an additional coverage and subject to policy terms.
In the spirit of reconciliation, the Theatre Thoughts podcast acknowledges the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. We pay our respects to their elders past and present and extend that respect to all traditional custodians of the land on which our episodes are recorded.
I mean, I just love that half the theatre people we've spoken to have decided that Hadestown is collectively the thing we most want. That checks out.
Yeah.
When I first saw Hadestown, it was just after all of the Tonys, so they just sort of swept the Tony Awards. So expectations were high, and I was not let down.
Yeah, right.
So I think as long as we don't scale it back, obviously the material stands on its own legs very easily, as you'd know from listening to the album. But I want the Revolve, I want the lift, I want the set expansion. Spare no expense when bringing Hadestown here, so you can have the full effect as everyone else in the UK and the US has had the opportunity for. That's my hope, but I don't think it'll disappoint. I think it would be very hard for Hadestown to let you down.
You're listening to the Theatre Thoughts podcast, where we dive deep into the world of theatre and celebrate the magic of the stage. I'm your host, Justin Clark, and I'm here to guide you through insightful conversations, behind-the-scenes stories, and thought-provoking discussions about everything theatre-related. Before we dive into today's episode, I want to remind you to connect with us on social media. You can follow us on Instagram at TheatreThoughtsAUS and TTPod_official for updates, behind-the-scenes content, and exclusive interviews. You can also find us on TikTok at Theatre Thoughts Australia for even more theatre goodness. And if you'd like to support the podcast and gain access to exclusive content, consider subscribing to our Patreon. So whether you're a seasoned theatregoer or just starting your journey, please sit back, relax, and enjoy this brand new episode of the Theatre Thoughts podcast. Welcome everyone to a brand new episode of the Theatre Thoughts podcast. Today I have a award-nominated, critically acclaimed director, producer, actor, musician, and MC. Many belts, many hats, or what's the say? Many hats, I think. They are the artistic director of Adelaide-based production company Preachrs Productions, who has directed non-replica productions of Rent in 2022 and Tick Tick Boom in 2023, which is one of my favourite musicals. They've recently toured Australia with the play Great Detectives and its sequels, and they currently host events for Palace Nova Cinemas as well as Oz Comic Con. Please welcome Benjamin Maio Mackay to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me on the show, Justin.
Thank you so much for jumping on. I know we've been kind of back and forth on Instagram and the socials chatting for a bit, and I've been trying to get you on, and thankfully I've lined up a time.
Oh, no, I'm glad to be here. As soon as anyone wants to give me a chance to talk about theatre, I am leaping at the opportunity.
Yeah, I totally feel that. I absolutely feel that. I had Andrew G from Andrew G Showtime on recently, and we kind of just like gas-bagged about theatre for a long time. It was really funny.
Yeah, I can imagine. Look, I think once you unlock the inner theatre nerd in any kind of performer, it's just go time.
Yeah, exactly. Well, for those of our listeners who aren't aware of who you are and your place in the theatre world, I'd love if you could just kind of do a quick little rundown of yourself and your highlights.
Yeah, of course. So I sort of started work 20 odd years ago. I did a lot of children's theatre and a lot of festival work, and essentially whatever I could to get on stage, pay the bills where possible and things like that. And then I was disheartened at the lack of opportunities for Australian artists, Australian productions. So I guess now 12-ish years ago, I started producing theatre, primarily initially within fringe festivals and things like Comedy Festival and Fringe World over in Perth. And I've run Preachrs Productions now, an Adelaide-based independent production company for 12 years. We've run venues, we've had seasons with over 100 performances in the Adelaide Fringe, collected a couple of awards along the way, which has been really lovely. I've also worked on some musicals outside of that. I got to work on Rent, which was a career highlight, and then backing it up with Tick Tick Boom, which also, to do both Larsons in the space of 18 months was absolutely a dream come true as someone who sort of grew up on Rent and then discovered Tick Tick Boom a little bit later. It's ticking boxes there. I got the immense honour to be invited to perform at 54 Below last year as well, the iconic New York cabaret venue. I'm still struggling to believe that happened, even though I can see photos and clips and things. I'm like, oh yes, it did. You sort of go to bed and like, did that happen? Did I dream that? No.
No, that's a thing.
Yeah, so that one is probably the most most notable thing I've ever done. I also hosted programs for ABC Radio Extra, and that was a thing before the Abbott government got rid of it.
Good.
So yeah, I've done a bit of radio work. I used to work for Supernova and used to host their convention events, and then now I get to work for Oz Comic Con, which is a really lovely organisation, and as well as doing Q&As for film launches through Palace Nova. And look, put me near a stage, and I will get upon it. Is basically that's my bio.
Yeah, I love it. I really reciprocate the stage feeling, because I know when we did, we were lucky enough to have some podcast episodes live last year at one of the venues in Sydney, and one of the last recordings before the place shut down was on the stage, and I was like, oh, that stage is free. Can I get the podcast on that stage? And then, like, as soon as I saw it, I was like, I'm getting up there, because I haven't done it in so long.
Oh, it's a calling. It's like when you see it, you just got to be on it. It's a drug. Theatre is the most addictive drug anyone can ever do.
It is, isn't it? I have a story about Tick Tick Boom. When you said it, just brought it back to me. So I kind of came late to the game as well of knowing what Tick Tick Boom was, and I remember I saw a West End production of it, or like an off-West End production of it, which was really good. It like brought me into like the kind of mindset of what it was, not knowing really about the Jonathan Larson connection and Rent and so on. But I saw the day after I left, the day after I went to see it, Lin-Manuel Miranda posted on his Instagram. He was like, seeing this production of Tick Tick Boom was amazing. And he was there the night after I went to see it. And I was just like, what are the chances?
That's painful. Can you imagine sitting next to Lin, watching him watch Tick Tick Boom? That would be an experience and a half.
And then knowing he did the film later, I could say to people, I was there when he probably decided to do that film. It would have been amazing.
It really would have been.
Well, I'd love to talk more theatre and go into our theatre thoughts questions with you, if you're open to doing them.
Absolutely.
So they're kind of just off the top of your head sort of questions. Only got a couple in there, and then we'll go back through and we'll pick them apart and see what your answers were. Okay.
Let's do it.
All right, here we go. So the first question is, what has been your favourite production you've seen recently?
Groundhog Day. I adored that. I didn't really know what to expect. I've never actually seen the film. I'm not much of a film person. So I sort of went in, and I also, as a rule, don't like all these adaptations of established properties. I don't think they often work. So I went in, not with low expectations, but curious. I was very curious. I know Elise. I know how incredibly talented and lovely she is. Obviously, Tim mentioned as a composer, incredible. And I sat down, and I think by interval, I'm like, oh, shit, I have to come back and see this again before it closes. So I sort of booked tickets for the closing night while I was still at the theatre. And I don't live in Melbourne. So, facilitating that, it was interesting. It was different. It was clever. I don't feel like it ever talked down to the audience. I think a lot of newer musicals have a tendency to treat us as dummies, for lack of a better word, or maybe they're pandering to American audiences who don't necessarily have the same media literacy that Australian audiences do. And also seeing a show in Australia on that scale that was written sort of post 2015 was really nice. As much as I love all the revivals, it is nice to see something new with a budget on that scale, clever, funny, heartfelt, incredible performances from a mostly Australian cast. yeah, it scratched a nerve for me.
Yeah. I will come back and I will talk about that because I have my own Groundhog Day story. Okay, well, the next question is, what's been the most challenging experience you've had as a director?
Mm,
Or you can go
that's
most
a great.
rewarding, either one, challenging or
Oh no,
rewarding.
I think challenging will probably yield a better story at some point. Look, there have been a couple of experiences that, I mean, anytime you sort of have an emergency swing on or an understudy on at last minute, which is never the fault of the performers. And I think what we've sort of done to platform understudies in the last sort of 4 years with the pandemic has been incredible. But I feel like one recent-ish example of a stressful time as a director or a challenging time. It was midway through the run of Rent, and that was still in the isolation for COVID period and all of the look. We were holding our breath to get through that season without any major complications. And we had our Joanne understudy on, who ended up doing the entire run, and she was incredible. She ended up getting nominated for an award for it. But then I think the Wednesday performance, our Mimi started to feel a little bit run down, so we had to swing on our Mimi understudies. We had two understudies in the lead eight, which meant I think someone did a three cover ensemble track that day, and just making sure all the moving pieces. I don't think the Mimi understudy had a chance to work it through the set as yet because everything was done very fast, low budget. You do what you can in independent theatre. So I feel like that was a uniquely challenging experience, very reminiscent of that sort of 2020-ish years. And yeah, I'm really glad that as an industry, we've moved away from the show must go on at all costs, despite what the performers are able to accomplish. And I'm so glad that we had understudies and swings and everyone ready to go. But that 6 hours between getting the call that our Mimi wasn't going on and then the curtain going up.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're stressed. You're biting your nails, and you're not eating and drinking. And you're like, oh my god, we have to get to curtain, and we have to make sure everyone feels comfortable enough to do everything to the best of their abilities, and still give the audience the best show that we possibly can. So that day was a challenge.
Yeah, it is an interesting thing because obviously in theatre, like anyone who knows theatre it is the saying, the show must go on. It's like been this thing since millennia, and then you're right with the 2020 and everything that happened in there, that it's kind of changed a little bit. It's like the show must go on to an extent, It's like we've added just like this little extra bit, and the rise of the swings is like, I still cannot fathom what swings do. Even though I've spoken to swings, I remember speaking to Kiara Setter when she was doing Six, and like she said she came on at like the drop of a hat for video making at one stage where she had to pull out like just before her song, and she came on to do her song, and I was just like, how do you have the capacity as a human being to do that? I was gobsmacked, absolutely gobsmacked. So praise to swings, really.
Oh, absolutely. It's especially when you get a mid-show swing on to pick up an emotional journey for a character halfway through the story that you normally tell as a creative. What a skill.
It's insane. Next question was, what is your all-time favourite production, or do you have one?
That's very challenging.
It is, isn't it?
Look, I think there's a little bit of me that the basic bitch of me that's like Wicked. I adore Wicked. I remember seeing that original Australian production, and it captivated me. It was so different to anything we'd seen in Australia for, well, really since Phantom of the Opera or some of those earlier big budget musicals. And I do try and see Wicked at any given opportunity wherever I am in the world now. So I must have clocked over 20 odd viewings of Wicked in the last 18 or so years. I think, though, Hadestown is probably a better production that I hold in higher reverence.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah, it's between those two. That's definitely. I think Hadestown has probably a little bit more creative merit to it. Not to knock Wicked in any way, because I do adore it. But I feel like Hadestown is maybe a smidge less commercial. It comes from a very different place. I think that it's the rooting of it in obviously the mythology is so interesting and so deep, and I love the casting choices that they continue to make, changing gender of a role, changing race, nothing matters as long as they're telling the story efficiently. And I think that's really interesting. We've not seen a lot of theatre like that before. And the score, Anais Mitchell's score, is just, it is earth-shatteringly beautiful.
It is, isn't
and
it?
If your listeners haven't seen it, there's a moment in Wait For Me where the set sort of opens up and expands. You sort of think it's quite sort of a boxed small set, and then second last song of Act One, it expands, and the collective gasps of the theatre, because I've had the privilege to see it a couple of times now, and you sort of watch the audience just have this reaction to the set getting bigger around you, because it's been stationary for so long, and then suddenly, bam, it's filling up the whole room. It's a stunning production.
So I guess that leads into the next question. Which production would you most want to see come to Australia? Would be Hadestown, I assume.
Oh, it would absolutely be Hadestown.
Yeah.
Look, I think that, as I sort of touched on a little bit when talking about Groundhog Day, there's a lot of new musicals that we haven't yet had the chance to experience live here in Australia. Hadestown obviously being one of them. I think Waitress should absolutely come to Australia at some point.
Yeah, that would do very well, I think.
Well, I remember at one point auditioning for it just pre-COVID. I think that was a victim of the shutdown.
Yeah, I've spoken to people about it, and I think it was a COVID casualty, but I don't know when it's going to come. Like, I had the chance to try again, you know?
Yeah, I think even Anastasia, which I believe was announced for 2020 as well, but obviously another victim of the shutdown. I think there's a lot of, we've sort of missed the last 5 to 10 years of theatre. I think we were set back so much as a result of that pandemic. We're just starting to catch up. I know we're getting to Evan Hansen now, and I'm more excited to see a non-replica production of it than the Broadway transfer. I recall in 2020 that Broadway transfer was coming, obviously Waitress, Anastasia. The theatrical landscape was looking a little bit more diverse in the modern theatre side of things.
Yeah.
And now, I feel like we've taken a few steps back. So I want to see things written post-2015.
Yeah. It's funny, coming back to Hadestown, I've never seen it, but I've listened to it multiple times, and I've seen like clips and you know, the Broadway, productions doing numbers and the number of the Olivier Awards. And I'm really worried now because I've done nearly 40, nearly 60 odd episodes of the podcast, and pretty much on half of them, when I started asking these Theatre Thoughts questions, the answer at the end is always Hadestown. And I'm really worried now that when it comes to Australia, that I'm going to be let down, and I'm just going to be like, I've hyped this up so much, and I'm going to sound be like, oh my God, that wasn't as good as what I thought it was going to be. I'm really worried.
Oh dear. I mean, look, I just love that every half the theatre people we've spoken to have decided that Hadestown is collectively the thing we most want. That checks out.
Yeah.
When I first saw Hadestown, it was just after all of the Tonys. So they just sort of swept the Tony Awards. So expectations were high, and I was not let down.
Yeah, right.
So I think as long as we don't scale it back, obviously then this material stands on its own legs very easily, as you'd know from listening to the album. But I want the revolve, I want the lift, I want the set expansion. Spare no expense when bringing Hadestown here, so you can have the full effect as everyone else in the UK and the US has had the opportunity for. That's my hope, but I don't think it'll disappoint. I think it would be very hard for Hadestown to let you down.
Yeah, exactly. So fingers crossed. I'm sure it's next couple of years, gotta be. But I want to go back to Groundhog Day, because I had my own story. So I saw Groundhog Day. I had the privilege of seeing it on Broadway. My friend and I wanted to go see it because we both love the movie, and we're like, oh, how's Tim Minchin going to make a musical out of this? Like, this, just like, how are you going to do it? And I remember sitting there watching it, and I was gobsmacked by it. So when they announced that it was coming back to Australia, my friend and I flew down to actually watch it again, and had Andy Carl again. So he's done Phil in all the iterations that it's been, and he's going to do it when they do the West End transfer apparently as well. So like having him back as well, and then just Elise was incredible in it, and the cast were incredible, and I was so glad that Australia got to see a musical like that, because you're right, we don't often get ones that are like post 2015 in terms of like when they were written, and it's just such a beautiful and like cleverly articulated staged production as well, with like, you know, the constant days being repeated and the acting that involves in it, not just with the leads but the ensemble as well. I was blown away by it yet again. I was like, yeah, okay, solid production. It was really good.
Oh, absolutely. It is. I mean, you do the same thing typically in the theatre 8 times a week, and then they do it 4 to 5 additional times on stage every
Yeah.
night, and it's got to match the beat to how we've seen it before.
Yeah.
Well, it's incredible. And also really glad that we got Andy Carl here in Australia, because as you say, he's done all the iterations of it, and it was just he was so comfortable in that role. You sort of
So
see him and go,
comfortable.
I don't understand how anyone else could do this. And I'm sure the understudies and swings were great when they went on, but he's just so comfortable and so confident, and that hope number sequence is a thing of beauty.
Isn't it? Isn't it? I remember because that's where they do all the switches, and it's that time where he starts to get really like mental, and like sick of the days. So I was watching this time. So I remember when I first saw it on Broadway, I was like, hang on, he was there and now he's here. How did he get there? And I was leaning forward and I was watching. I was like, oh, is that the switch? Is that where they've switched it? And some I could get and some I still couldn't get, even though I was like leaning right forward in my seat to try to find the switch. But I love a bit of stage magic. I absolutely go crazy for it.
Oh, same. And yeah, because I did get to see it twice in Melbourne. I did the same thing. I saw it the first time and just astounded. And then I think I caught 3 of the 4 switches. I couldn't get the last one. I've got no idea where he goes when he goes up the ladder, and then the dummy sort of falls and he's at the front of the crowd. No idea how they do that one.
Yeah.
It's probably going to drive me mad forever.
Very good, isn't it? Well, thank you so much for answering those. I love delving into those questions because they're always different, apart from the Hadestown one, every time. But let's. I'm going to just take a quick little ad break, and then we'll talk a little bit about Preacher Productions and making work as an artist in Australia.
This episode is brought to you by Shopify. Do you have a point of sale system you can trust, or is it a real POS? You need Shopify for retail. From accepting payments to managing inventory, Shopify POS has everything you need to sell in person. Go to shopify.com/system, all lowercase, to take your retail business to the next level today. That's shopify.com/system.
Okay, so let's talk about Preacher Productions then. So it's an Adelaide-based company. You've done a couple of productions so far, like we've talked about Rent, we've talked about Tick Tick Boom. But I'd love to know where the idea of starting that company came from. I don't know, what is wrong with my words today? It must be the early morning.
Sunday mornings, words are hard.
I know. Sunday, I've checked out. So where the history of the company came from and what's next? Like, where do you see it going?
So, the company is 10 to 12 years old. Originally, it was sort of very small fringe-esque productions that were just Adelaide-based things, tributes to sci-fi shows, sort of conventional Q&A, small things, small intimate productions, playing to 80 to 100 people. That's sort of the max initially. And then over time, it's grown to, we've gone to Fringe World a number of times over in Perth. We've gone to the Melbourne International Comedy Festival a couple of times, produced work for some digital theatres, some digital fringes, like the one in Orlando and the one Wadsworth. I might need to fact check myself on that one. During that initial stage of the pandemic, we did a lot of sort of digital theatre stuff that was easy to do when you couldn't do anything else. A couple of audio productions as well. So outside of live theatre, we worked on the Phoenix Files, which is initially was a young adult sci-fi series by an Australian author, Chris Morphew, very successful YA books, and we turned those into a radio play series, which you can still stream on Spotify and Amazon and everything. And that's got Paul McGann in it, as well as Stephen May, who theatre people might know from things like Grease and Wedding Singer, and Kurt Thielen, who was in Dirty Dancing, as well as Andrew Hansen from The Chaser. And that was a cast of 45,
Oh, wow.
I think, Australian actors. Like, it was massive. It took 18 months to record and put together, and I think it's sort of like 9 hours worth of audio. So if audio and sci-fi is your thing, you can delve into that on Spotify, and we'll get paid 0.0003 cents
Yeah.
of it. But excuse me, but yeah, that's out there as well. And got to work on. We turned a one-woman show called Socially Unacceptable, which was about a series of assaults that had occurred to this performer, just being a woman in the world. We turned that into a audio product, which you can stream as well, which is a very powerful piece of theatre. As to why Preachrs Productions exists, it comes from a lack of ability to work consistently. A lot of artists have fantastic ideas that they don't know how to realize. There's a difference between having a good idea and knowing how to put it on a stage, or get it up in whatever way that you want to. We don't have a lot of options and pathways to platform independent work or unique work. So as Preachrs Productions has grown, sort of in 2016, 17, I started opening up. If you're looking for a producer, be it for Adelaide Fringe, be it for a solo season outside, be it for a show in Sydney, Melbourne, whatever, send me an email, get in touch. And I started working very closely with Calixta Cheers, another local producer here, because the workload got too big for me to do myself, which was a fantastic place to be in. And then I think through sort of 2019, 2020, 2021, we were producing more than 100 shows at the festivals here in South Australia, and taking some of those interstate and overseas where possible as well. But we worked on Bella Green is Charging for It, which won Best Comedy, and she ended up getting a book deal with Pan Macmillan as a result of that. Worked with John Bennett, who's done a lot of stuff off-Broadway and is now living in the States, working fairly consistently as a storyteller and comedian. Did 4 or 5 of his shows here in Australia. Worked with people like Jax Picken, a local non-binary comedian who has won a couple of awards and got some amazing reviews now. So it's a combination of wanting to stage work that I want to work on, and making sure that other creatives have the opportunity to be produced, to be seen, because being a creative doesn't always mean that you're good at the business side of things. A lot of creatives aren't, and that's absolutely okay. Everyone's got strengths. So the company exists so that there's not just a wasteland of either, sort of the top end commercial stuff and then nothing, or sort of top end commercial stuff and then the amateur theatre, which has a place, a very important place as a growing platform. But for those who want to do it professionally in independent scene, there's got to be a middle ground somewhere. And that's what I hope that we're doing and continue to do into the future. And then yes, we got to work on a couple of musicals in conjunction with the Lot Theatre, which Rent and Tick Tick Boom, I mean, I sort of said what a glorious combination of musicals there. And now into the future. So as you sort of mentioned in your opening spiel, I've worked on a show on and off for 10 years called Great Detectives, which is a 1950s set, loving tribute to the radio plays of that era. Sort of 4 actors, microphones. There's a level of slapstick to it. There's a lot of voices. I think one of the actors does 12 or 14 different voices, ranging from a child to an old woman. Very, very funny, very physical. Got a mystery component to it as well. And we celebrated our, I think, 200th performance in March, and that's going on a regional tour from July. We start, I know Darwin's not technically regional, but we're going to for a moment call Darwin regional. I'm so sorry, the people of Darwin. We're starting at the Darwin Entertainment Centre, and then we're sort of going through regional South Australia, and then next year I think we should be hitting the capital cities again with this new production. So yeah, there is a lot in the works. Also producing a concert for Carla Gar from Six. She's coming to Adelaide. Putting her on stage. So yeah, there's a few things, and then I would very much like to run a venue again for the Adelaide Fringe. It's sort of festival season. I've done that a couple of times, and would turn over 9 shows a day, which is chaos. And
that's insane.
There were just 2 of us running it as well. So it's just me and Callie. Did that, and we'd really like to do it again. We needed a couple of years off. Because, you do that and you do it for 6 days a week, 5 weeks in a row, and you sort of get to the end of it like, oh, I'm ready to die. Yeah. But we had a bit of a chat a couple of weeks ago, and we started talking to a venue, and yeah, I'd love to embrace that level of chaos one more time, because you just get to see so much art, and sort of having 10, 12, 20,000 people through the doors of a place that you're running to see art over the space of 4 weeks is such a rewarding experience.
Yeah, I bet.
Especially in Adelaide, because I love South Australia. I love getting to work interstate and overseas as well, but I really do love this city. But we're not always the best at embracing the art that's here. We need a festival. We need sort of something to push us out of our seats. We're also notoriously last minute ticket buyers, which as a producer, you can genuinely go from having a show where you've sold 50 seats to a show that's sold out in the 2 hours beforehand,
Oh my God.
which is painful. And you
Yeah.
sit here and it's like, do you start discounting tickets? Or if you're discounting tickets, are you rewarding people for waiting, which you don't want to do? So if you do early bird seats, like you're forever in this mind fuck of how to encourage people to do the right thing. And honestly, no matter what you do, you end up getting most of your sales in the last sort of 2 hours before. Even with Great Detectives this year that we just did in Adelaide in March, that's a sort of tried and tested show, a series. We've had a number of mysteries and things over the years. That's a successful product 9 times out of 10. We didn't sell out any shows until I think a day before we were supposed to open, and then once one sold out, people I think got the idea that maybe we should actually get on and buy some tickets, and we sold out I think just over 50% of the season, which is great.
Incredible.
But waiting to the day beforehand is
the anxiety
inducing.
Oh my God. Jesus. Yeah, that's oh my God. I don't know how I'd handle that, to be completely honest with you. I was very much used to being like a performer. I never did a lot of the behind the scenes stuff until later on, but that's like, oh my God, anxiety. Well, that's amazing. Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah, it's been a lot of up and downs, as there are with any theatre and any theatre company, but I'm very glad to still be here and still be doing it. And honestly, I would welcome more companies like what I'm doing, what we're doing, not just in South Australia, but across the board, because I think that there's a lot of great artists and a lot of great art that needs to be seen. And I want more for the Australian audiences. I want more for the Australian artists.
Yeah.
We shouldn't be fighting for the scraps.
Yeah, totally. Absolutely agree with you. Well, I think that kind of leads on to my next question. It's a question I ask all of my guests that come on, and I'd love to know how you think the theatre industry's changed over the years and how that's impacted the work that you do and create. I think you've kind of touched on it a little bit, but I think this is a little bit more poignant question.
Yeah, it's a very good question. I think ultimately the commercial theatre has become elitist, which is a huge problem. I mean, you have lotteries and you have maybe a $70 restricted view seat, but at the end of the day, you're paying typically $200-ish for a good seat at any of the big musicals or plays, and that's a problem because that's made theatre elitist, and it's always been a luxury. Theatre has always been a luxury, especially in this country. We've not really done well at making it accessible on a baseline. But I think that's gotten worse, and that's gotten worse post-COVID as well, which I understand is the rents are higher, the insurance costs more. There's a lot that's changed as a result of the last 4 years. So I understand that, therefore, if you still want those same profit margins, your ticket prices have to go up. But people aren't making more money. So you're really making theatre for the top 5% or for someone as a treat every 18 months. And that's not how theatre thrives. I think that's really the biggest change, is that we've made theatre as on the commercial scale for really the top 5%. And that's a problem. I know that I would not see as much theatre unless I got invites to things or discounts through knowing artists, producers, venue staff, whatever. That's just the reality of it. And that's a shame. So I think one of the biggest changes that we've seen is that theatre looks different, and who's in the theatre looks different. And I think that if we want to create as a nation good theatre that speaks to people of all ages, genders, sexes, races, etc., we actually need to make sure that theatre is accessible to all those younger people across the spectrum of everything, because you don't know how to create. The best way to learn, and I've done my fair share of studies as well, but the best way to learn, in my opinion, is to watch as much theatre as you can, good, bad, or indifferent. I think you grow the most as an artist and as a creative from watching other people do it.
Yeah, definitely.
And that's not feasible. If you talk to your average 15-year-old at this point, they cannot afford to go and see Wicked and Juliet, Grand Hotel, whatever's on, because the ticket's starting at $80.
Yeah.
So I think what's been important to me is to make sure that where possible, prices are as reasonable as possible. And sometimes that does mean that, unfortunately, tickets still have to start at $50 because, as I say, everything is expensive and it's painfully expensive now.
Yeah.
But I love Today Tix. I love what Today Tix is doing. The fact you can have
yes.
like a youth ticket or a lottery,
Yes.
or we've got 30 tickets left. Let's offload them at $20 a head because we've broken even. Whatever that is, I love their model. I'm so glad that's finally in Australia. I think that's going to be a really useful way to make theatre accessible. More people need to know about it first, especially younger people.
Well, yeah, I introduced it to my friend recently in Sydney, and he was like, he was like wanting to go see like West Side Story and that, and I was like, oh, have you looked at Today Tix? They do rush tickets, and he's like, what's Today Tix? I'm like, what do you mean you don't know what Today Tix is? Like, get on there right now. And he went and saw Anne Juliet and West Side Story. He won like the lottery for Anne Juliet, and I was like, well, you're welcome.
Exactly. And I think so with even websites like LastTix, which have been around for 20 or so years, people don't really know that they're there and know how to utilize them as well as they could be. So I think those things need to take a little bit more space in our, especially younger people's minds, so that new creatives can grow. I think the theatre industry has also changed as well because it's taking less risks. I think there was a point where we did. I mean, bringing Wicked to Australia in 2008 was a risk.
Right.
Like, there's enough people have said that over time. That was a very expensive show in a market that typically didn't like or respond well to big expensive shows.
Yeah, right.
That kind of risk would not be taken now. We don't see that risk being taken now. And obviously Wicked is your safe bet. So I think as well as the price tag going up, we are seeing more and more commercial theatre make no real bold choices.
Yeah.
I think that's one of the reasons that Groundhog Day spoke so much to me, as I sort of touched on, is that it was interesting. It wasn't just new, it was a bold, creative choice.
Yeah.
It might not be for everyone, but theatre doesn't have to be for everyone.
No.
Don't go out of your way to alienate people. But art should make you feel something. And, I don't want to see Book of Mormon again. And I'm all power to every creative who gets to work on it because we need jobs.
Yeah.
But fundamentally, that is not a creative risk.
Yeah, it's funny. I think I posted this on my Instagram because I'm the same. I'm like, I want to see new stuff. Oh my God, Greek's coming back. Oh my God, this is coming back. I was like, but then when I saw that announced, I went, oh shit, yeah, I really love Book of Mormon. So I was very hypocritical. I was like, oh damn it, I'm really excited for this. But you're right.
Oh, look, that was me a year ago with Wicked. I'm like, oh, no, more revivals. Oh, Wicked, I guess you're going to take my money for the next year and a half.
But it's like, I think it kind of goes back to what we were saying about the pandemic. And I think a lot of people have been asking me this, like, why are we seeing all these revivals? And I think it mainly has to do with the pandemic. Like, you're right in what you said. We've been set back about 5 or 10 years, really, because a lot of the producers, this is what I assume. I don't know this off fact, but I assume that a lot of them are trying to recoup losses still. So they're bringing back safe bets. They're bringing back Grease because Grease sells out. Even though it's not a good musical, it sells out. People work on it, gives people jobs. Chicago sells out. Wicked sells out. Book of Mormon was very popular and so on. So I'm hoping that once they recoup their losses, then you'll have more producers like Michael Castle who are basically leading the new shows. We've got Beetlejuice, Groundhog Day, Dear Evan Hansen. I'm hoping that once that we catch back up and we get back to that stage you were talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. You're completely right. The pandemic, really, really set us back there. But I think that's sort of been a recent but big change to theatre, to sort of answer your question. And how I've responded to that is, it's still a business. I have to balance having an income with doing good art. I love Great Detectives. It is well reviewed. It's been well reviewed since the start 10 years ago. But I also know that typically, and I'm going to touch wood here, that's a show that sells, it appeals to audiences. It's probably not rewriting the book on creative offerings, but it's fun to do, it's fun to watch, people like it, and it sells. So that's the market has affected that. I've sort of brought that back, despite how much I love doing it and having a good time with it. I know that audiences will respond to it, hopefully, as well as they have for the last decade. But having that means that I'm able to take risks and go, okay, so that's great. Let's try and produce something different that's got a lower price point. Let's work with this, new storyteller, this new comedian, this, woman developing her first show, whatever that is. I guess having a surefire, and using that word in this industry is dangerous, having a surefire hit enables you to do something creatively more risky.
Yeah.
So I guess I'm cognizant as a result of the changes that I've seen just specifically in the last 5 or so years, that I want to make sure that I've always got a balance of art that I hope /know will sell versus art that I hope will sell, but isn't a guarantee. It's a risk. It's a choice. It's going to make people feel something. When I, going back just to sort of pre-pandemic on that cusp, when I worked with my late friend Bella Green on her show, Bella Green is Charging for It. She was a sex worker who'd not really done a lot of stand-up comedy before, had written a lot, got on stage. That was bold as hell for her to do, for every venue that took it on, for everyone who worked on that. And then audiences connected so much with this show because she was funny and endearing, and what could have been very controversial material that people had, fits about in the media, ended up being the show that resonated and won awards across the country. And you sort of go, great, what a risk that paid off. But you can't predict an audience.
No.
I guess is the lesson you learn there. But that's sort of it. I want to keep taking those risks as a result of everything that the commercial gods are doing. Just keep platforming small artists so that they can grow and become bigger artists, because they all have to start somewhere, and we don't necessarily have this clear trajectory. Not that it was ever super clear, but what was once there, these stepping stones, are kind of gone. So all of those sort of changes mean that I want to try and build them back, even if they're a little bit flimsy and festival based and everything. I want new work and new artists and diverse artists to be able to tell stories, and new works to be seen by Australian audiences who don't, earn in the top 5%.
Yeah, I think it's very well said. You've said it very, very well, and I wholly resonate with it. So thank you so much for giving me all your thoughts on that. Well, Ben, thank you so much for jumping on. This has been enlightening for a Sunday morning to have a good chat about theatre. Thank you so much for jumping on, and I'm really keen to see everything else that you do with Preachrs Productions and what comes next. And please, by all means, if there's anything else you want to plug before we leave, now's your chance to do so.
Thank you very much, Justin. Look, I think the big one for this year is if you are in Darwin or anywhere in rural South Australia, come and see Great Detectives, all new mysteries. We've got a bunch of tour dates across the second half of this year, and then if the show sounds like something you might enjoy, we should be in Perth and Melbourne and Sydney at the start of next year as well. So keep an eye out for that. Come see Carla Gar in concert. You can check out her Instagram. It's got all the ticket details, as well as obviously I'll share some things. And if you are an artist with an idea that you think might do well on stage or resonate at a festival, get in touch, drop me a line. If you want to work on an idea, if you have a thought, if you want a sounding board, reach out. Let's have a chat.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Ben, for your time. Have a great rest of your Sunday, and we'll stay in touch.
Thanks very much. You too, Justin.
A massive thank you to Benjamin for joining us on this week's episode of the Theatre Thoughts podcast. To find out more about Preachrs Productions, head to preacherspodcast.net. You'll find out all about Great Detectives or New Mysteries, as well as Carla Gare in concert, and where to find all the information on tickets for the tours. You can also head to the link in this episode's description for all the links you need. This episode was produced by Echidna Audio. Follow them on Instagram at Echidna Audio for all their audio services. Once again, if you enjoyed our podcast, leave us a review wherever you get your podcasts, and head to the link in this episode's description for our Instagram account, TikTok, YouTube, and Patreon. My name's Justin Clark, and I'll see you next time here on the Theatre Thoughts podcast.
Disney's Aladdin on Broadway is among the longest-running shows in Broadway history. But did you know that it almost never came to be?
We walked out of Seattle thinking, okay, we don't have it. We have a lot of work to do.
But against tremendous odds, in March of 2024, they celebrated 10 years on Broadway.
Disney did a great job because they really took the notes.
Go behind the magic and listen to this never-before-heard story, the magical making of Disney's Aladdin on Broadway. Available everywhere you can get your podcasts.
Can you identify an alphabet just from her defying gravity war cry?
Can you name every actress in the Wicked to Waitress pipeline?
Or does the phrase witch switch mean anything to you?
Well then,
Good news!
My name's Quincy.
And my name's Kevin.
And we're the hosts of Sentimental Men.
We're here to talk,
and maybe scream,
about our favorite women in musical theater, the witches of Wicked. So if spending a Friday night in a no-good deed rabbit hole on YouTube sounds like your idea of a good time, then Sentimental Men is the podcast for you.
And with guests like Jessica Vosk, Lucy Jones, and Stephanie J. Block, chances are we've already got an episode with your favorite Elphaba.
Or Glinda, like Laura Bell Bundy, Brittany Johnson, and Mackenzie Kurtz.
So pause your riff compilations, put down your copy of The Grimmery, and give Sentimental Men a listen.
You can find us on the Broadway Podcast Network or wherever you listen to podcasts.